Welcome to a stripped down version of the Steve Deace Show. We're down a man, maybe the most important man, in fact. The man who makes the trains run on time, let alone at all. A good man down, Aaron McIntyre. First time in 10 years I think we've had this, but I mean, he's come in here, guys, over the years plenty of times, especially little ones at home. He's come in here plenty of times and made it work, made it happen while under the weather. But he's got the kind of stomach bug that, let's just say, there are certain thrones you can't be too far away from for an extended period of time until they run their course. You know what I'm saying? So we made the call about an hour and a half ago for Aaron to stay home and crash. And then we called Dallas, and we got to thank Stephen and John and the crew there for Stephen Smith, John Munoz, and others for making this happen for us. And we kind of had to make do. So you're not going to have some of the elements you're accustomed to. No guests today either. But you're going to get a full 2 hours of myself here in the Man Cave Command. And then back there in the studio, another good man who made it in this morning. But he's all by himself. Todd Erzen is there as well. So, Todd, just you and me today. And you ready to rock and roll? Because there's a lot going on. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. There's never a good day to have what Aaron has right now. But if there was ever a day that we can handle this on our own without him, I mean, the amount of stuff that we have to talk about today, I mean, we're going to be pretty loaded for bear.
We'll stand our post. We'll do our duty. Indeed.
So apologies also if any of the uploads are later today. No live show on X, no overtime today. But you will get the 2-hour program you are accustomed to here. And we are brought to you by our friends over at First Cup Coffee Company, the Christian-owned Patriot Coffee Company that stands for core values like family, faith, and country. But don't buy their coffee for that reason. That helps, right? I mean, if we can support people who have the same value system that we do, that's great. But it's really just a hella cup of coffee. They've got a flavor for every freedom-loving American, and their flavors also harken back to Americana as well. You can get it shipped to you within days of being roasted. They'll put the roast on date right there in every bag, so you can see freshness is kind of their thing. Get a discount when you go to firstcup.com and use the promo code DACE. Go to firstcup.com, use the promo code DACE. You'll get a discount at firstcup.com, promo code DACE. All right, next hour, we are going to finish Romans chapter 6 in Theology Thursday. We're going to finish that here in the next hour of the show. And there are two huge ideas at the close of Romans 6 we need to discuss, because they are going to go, I mean, right at the culture today. They're going to go right at the spirit of the age. The zeitgeist of Western civilization is in peril when we get to the second half of chapter 6 in the book of Romans. And it will help to explain for a lot of us why our culture is in the position it's in. It's failure to recognize the reality of the human condition and therefore respond accordingly. All right. So we will get to that coming up in the next hour of the show. But Todd, let's start out with, in lieu of no montage from Aaron today, I think there are really three major stories that we're going to spend our first hour talking about on the program. And of course, let's begin with right now, we'll just call it a tragedy. All we know at the time that we are recording this and doing it as live today on The Blaze. And so who knows what details will come out, folks, by the time you may listen to a podcast version of this or watch it on YouTube later. But as of right now, here are the details that we have. A military Black Hawk helicopter expected or suspected of being on a training mission collided in air with a plane that was literally about to land in less than about 2 to 3 minutes. An inbound plane to D.C., to Reagan National there in D.C., from Wichita, Kansas. And as far as we know right now, they are saying there are no survivors. This morning, President Trump posted the following statement about the incident. On Truth Social, quote, "The airplane was on a perfect and routine line of approach to the airport. The helicopter was going straight at the airplane for an extended period of time. It is a clear night. The lights on the plane were blazing. Why didn't the helicopter go up or down or turn? Why didn't the control tower tell the helicopter what to do instead of asking if they saw the plane? This is a bad situation. It looks like it should have been prevented, not good. And in fact, first thing this morning, shortly after the president issued that statement on Truth Social, the brand new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, so here's your first day, he held a press conference and, quote, "preventable absolutely," end quote, are his words. At least 60 souls have perished in this crash that we know of as of now. And I do think there are a lot of questions. I mean, you know, you have a massive airliner like that that's in the midst of descent and is really at the culmination of its descent. Maybe its gear is already down and everything else. I mean, that's kind of a fait accompli, right? It's heading to ground. So the much more maneuverable vehicle, which would be the helicopter, it couldn't divert its path at all. I mean, that's what President Trump is alluding to. We've got to get answers to those kinds of questions, Todd. But as of right now, at the time that we are recording this, that's all we know for a fact. And you know, our show policy is typically we are not in any hurry to be wrong about these situations, especially when people are still in mourning. I'm sure many of folks, Todd, have seen the tragic story of the young man that's waiting there for his wife who had just texted him from the plane 20 minutes before they were, about to land. Can't wait to see you. And now she's never coming home. And there's going to be dozens more sad stories like that as well.
Just clear up as much as you can as soon as possible. We were just talking yesterday, Steve, about the drones when our new White House press secretary just came out and told us, what was going on. And Steve, you said what many others said. Why didn't the Biden administration just say this stuff to begin with? As soon as you have answers about anything, and the way people are, and they're so skeptical, and they have instantly have conspiracy theories, release the names of the 3 people on the helicopter as soon as possible. Clear their name in terms of at least, even if they were in air, that there isn't something nefarious going on, because just let's learn our lesson in real time. That what just happened a month ago with these drones. Let people know what's going on.
I'm glad you referenced the drones. We normally have a policy on the show. What's said in the overtime stays in the overtime, because we do that specifically for our subscribers. And since they're the ones that keep this, they deserve some things that are just for them. But in this case, we're going to break the seal here on that, because the drone topic, I'm sure if Aaron were here today, and the response from White House spokeswoman Carolyn Leavitt would have been a part of his montage today. It came up in passing as we were doing bonus buy, seller, hold. So I think that's a good reason for us to give an exception. Since we did talk so much about this before Christmas, I think that the new White House's attempt to close the loop on this, we should address. And summarizing what spokeswoman Leavitt said yesterday, or 2 days ago now, on Tuesday, she said that it's special research being conducted by the FAA. This is not enemy technology, okay? And the question that I have to that, which you just alluded to, why wouldn't the Biden administration just tell us this? If that's true, then why not? Why all this suspense? Especially over Christmas too. Especially over Christmas. You're psyoping people over Christmas? And so we did discuss this yesterday in the overtime a little bit, Todd. I believe your theory was basically kind of what your mantras, which, turns out to be accurate more times than not. The lie is the point. Aaron had a hypothesis that they loved having this as a distraction from many other things going on in the world that were making them look bad on their way out the door, and the things that they were planning to do. For example, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said last night that Mayorkas tried to sign one last stay order for, untold millions of illegals on his way out the door, right? These pardons and everything else that we talked about, but that Aaron thought maybe that we were talking about before Christmas, but that Aaron thought maybe this drone story, they were happy to keep it alive because maybe it was distracting the normie person from the stuff they were doing on their way out the door. So let's spend a couple of minutes talking about that here. Are you buying what Carolyn Leavitt said? Do you buy that explanation? And if you do, then reiterate your theory as to why, if it's just that simple, why the Biden regime didn't tell us that.
Well, they lied to us, and the lie is the point because they hold the public in contempt. There are betters. It's constant boot throat. So it's just an instinct, honestly, with them. There's not, at no point do they say, maybe we should level with the American people. That's not who they are. They don't like the American people, so it's easy for them to lie. They don't even think about it. As it applies to the specifics of what Levitt said, it is either that simple, or it's, as we talked about before Trump was even in office, it's either that simple, or it's so bad or so confusing or so potentially off-putting to the public that nobody knows how to message it without causing some kind of movie level panic. It's one or the other.
I think it's entirely possible that everything Caroline said is true, but it's not sufficient. That it is special FAA research. She never itemizes or quantifies for us, Todd. Research into what? Like what kind of research is required to psyop, millions of your own people? And frankly, if this was under the Democrat administration, this is going on in Connecticut, New Jersey. These are their own states, their own governments. They're psyoping their own people. Their own governors are not happy. They're doing this research over military installations all over the country: Utah, California, for example, Virginia, Louisiana. We found out about too. So the question would then become, what kind of research is required to not give heads up to serious people like governors of states, military installations that are going on high alert because they're unaware of what it is that's flying over their airspace, right? I mean, what kind of research would require that?
Well, here, if I'm Sean Duffy, as you said, like thrown right into the fire, here's what I'm asking about that. If there's any connective tissue on this at all. Do these drones, which can be pretty large now, if they're ours and we're doing research, they're large enough that they have apparatus contained within them, they can basically mimic that which is inside a chopper like this. And so then they're putting them up there to be the good guys. And then our people on the ground are pretending to be the bad guys to see if we can sufficiently jam their ability to use their radar, as, for example, flying down the Potomac at night with a plane in front of them. I'd want to know instantly if any of that was connective tissue.
That is an interesting hypothesis. I think that we should maybe leave it there and wait for more answers to come in the next 24 hours before we're on the air again. Let's talk about what was the biggest story in the country until that incredible tragedy last night, and that was the testimony of RFK Jr. We talked about the yesterday on the show, the gravity of the moment heading in and what was at stake coming out. But because the testimony in and of itself was taking place in real time as we were doing our show yesterday, we couldn't get into the specifics. And to me, what stood out more than anything is, and there's something that RFK Jr. said yesterday I actually disagree with. And I think that's a worthy discussion to have as well. But for all the gotcha attempts that they had lined up, Bernie Sanders even had lined up onesies. I literally questioned RFK Jr. about onesies. Okay. And if you watch the clip of that, you can hear Megyn Kelly in the background laughing out loud. All right. Oh, God bless her. That kind of questioning, that's what it deserves. It does not deserve a serious retort. It deserves mockery and scorn, which is exactly what Megyn gave it in that clip. But what I find fascinating is they had all their gotcha questions lined up, and the media today has no moment that they can hammer, focus on, and say, and rally their side on to provide cover to vote against him. He gave them nothing. If anything, they helped him, because there were several times, like when Bernie Sanders asked him, is health care a right? And when they could sense he was going to school them on his answer, that they cut him off rather than let him talk. Okay. And so if anything, they helped edit him. They kept his answers, they kept his exposure tightened because they were afraid of him exposing them. And if you're Lindsey Graham, if you're John Cornyn, if you're Susan Collins, if you're Lisa Murkowski, and if you're Joni Ernst, some of the names we heard, barking at the moon, where a Kash Patel or especially a Pete Hegseth is concerned. If you were looking for him to give you something, particularly if you're a Cornyn in a Texas, a Lindsey Graham in a South Carolina, and you're in a deep red state, if you were hoping, praying that he was going to give you some canard, some Cooksville quote that you could latch onto that would provide you the fig leaf over your big pharma nakedness to justify voting against him as a false objection, you got nothing yesterday. Absolutely jack frickin' squat. He gave you nothing. If anything, I'd almost think if you were an OG Maha person like you, I'd almost be tempted to go the other way thinking, man, I was really hoping he was going to go in there, man, and just hammer these people and drop knowledge on them. And some of that happened, but a lot of it didn't. He kind of got in and got the hell out, okay? If anything, I think the temptation would be to be critical of him if you were a loyalist in that faction thinking, we missed our moment, okay? I mean, he even, in some respects, one of the longest conversations they even had was about the abortion issue, which I'm totally fine that was asked. It should have been. And he needed to give the answer that he did, which is, I report to the President of the United States, and in no way, shape, or form will I be doing anything to curtail his pro-life policies. I mean, but they walked out of there with nothing. If anything happened that was damaging. And I saw this from left of center populist people in the Maha movement on X yesterday. Some of those people that we exchanged work with, Todd, during our work in COVID, and we shared their work and they shared ours, right? Okay. And what I saw from several of those people were, how in the hell did I support these people all these years? Nicole Shanahan, the former Druid priestess, who I will admit is growing on me, okay? I will admit. I mean, she's out there just literally sub-tweeting U.S. senators she donated to, threatening to put up 6-7 figures against them in their next election cycles. To see if anything was exposed dangerously for either side, Todd, to me it seems watching Elizabeth Warren saying, me like wampum from Big Pharma. Watching Bernie Sanders, power to the people, vote populi. Do you support these onesies? Seeing that really in the end, there truly isn't anything. The liberal that we grew up with does not exist anymore. At least not as a construct holding public office. Maybe the closest thing to it left is a John Fetterman. But he's an exception. By and large, that construct in our body politic is gone. And you're either total state or you're an American. That's essentially what's left. And I think that may have gotten exposed to some people yesterday, but the other side came out with nothing. You got nothing from RFK Jr. to justify voting against him, which means if you go ahead and do here in the next week or so, you are just outing yourself as, hey, I just need you to know I'm a complete and total whore for Big Pharma. I'll do whatever they tell me to do.
Yeah, I'm still, it was very surreal. That word is overused these days. But for somebody like me, quite frankly, I was wondering if I'd ever see this in my lifetime. It's amazing. And they didn't get, Steve, anything to hang on the bulletin board for two reasons. One, they apparently read your book, Never Accept the Premise of Any Question. Just answer what you want to. This is the game there. Bobby knows it. Apparently everybody knows it right now in real time. Tulsi and Kash Patel know it. They've just it's amazing. I don't suddenly we seem to understand the game, not just on the Maha stuff. They obviously know. You know what I think about vaccines even before COVID, but on everything, we're just better at this now. We understand the game, which is just so refreshing. And secondly, as it applies to COVID, to vaccines specifically, Bobby being asked about, polio and him just, name, rank, and serial number. I support vaccines. I support the polio vaccine. I mean, listen, he was Colonel Jessup. You can't handle the truth. He knows he's this close. He knows he's this close, and he's going to get in.
He's this close to being General Jessup if he keeps his mouth shut, is what you're saying, right?
Because basically, listen, here, the kind of stuff that you would say, but that would make people lose their minds. Polio, scary. I understand. Like I said, with COVID, it didn't come for a thief in the night for your kids. Polio actually did on some level, but do people even know that most people who got the polio virus and like 95% just had symptoms of the common cold? They still have no idea about that, because the lie has always been the point. Do they even consider, where does polio come from? It hasn't been here forever. It started for reasons that a lot of people have tried to connect the dots on, having to do with some of it with farming and the chemicals that started to be used, how it attacks the nervous system. We have the swimming pool, humid environments, so we knew kind of where it happened. We know a lot more than the system is willing to talk about. But why would Kennedy open up those cans of worms right there amongst the onesie crowd? No. And the game has allowed for not being fully honest during these things for a long time, no matter what side you're on. So the man was brilliant in getting through the way he did.
In my Bible in a Year reading today, I came to the story of Rahab the prostitute. And
there you go.
Who refuses to tell the truth to her own countrymen about where the Jewish spies are, the Hebrew spies are, that she is hiding. She doesn't tell them the truth. And when she explains to the Jewish spies why, she goes, well, we know your God, Yah. We know. We have seen what you guys have been doing to all the kingdoms of Canaan before us. All right. And our hearts melted, I think, is the exact wording that Rahab uses. So I'm going to do one of these. All right. And if there's anything a prostitute knows how to do, it's read a room. Okay. Know who's hot to trot, and which client is willing to pay up. If there's anything I know how to do as a prostitute, it's those things. And I can clearly see which God is actually God around here. So I'm joining that team if you guys will have me. And she shows up in the lineage of Christ. We talked the other day on the show. Do we have to consider now that literally the Trump campaign just had a plan all along just to lie through its teeth about the abortion issue, knowing it was just justifying it, saying it was just never going to get a fair hearing from the enemy anyway? So give up, since they won't hear any truth, they won't hear any compromise, they won't hear any reason. Even if we offered it sincerely, we're just going to lie. And then if we win, then we'll just do what we want. And all three of us thought there might at least have been some of that as a real plan, right?
Yeah. To
some extent, I think you saw that from RFK Jr. yesterday. Okay. If you were diagramming sentences, there was a lot of short diagrams. We weren't going to the third or fourth chalkboard a lot yesterday. Okay. You know what I mean? I mean, it was just subject, predicate, period. I mean, hey, if you ask me something specific, I'll happily answer you. After that, I'm not going to say any. I've got nothing else to say. My work kind of speaks for itself. And I'm starting to think, if this becomes, as I think it needs to be, a vector in the pro-life fight, Todd, I'm starting to think that I support the polio vaccine is the new I'm pro-life except for rape and incest. You see what I'm saying? Like the thing that the system demands that I have to offer, okay, the alm I must make, okay, for the Overton window to let me through with my pro-life position. I have to say, if you get raped or you're a victim of incest, those are terrible things, which of course they are. And I think rape and incest ought to be capital offenses, frankly. And so therefore you can kill your kid and we'll look the other way. I think the polio vaccine will be the new I'm pro-life except for rape and incest, if this does become a permanent vector of debate in the culture in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, you're probably right. And by checking these boxes, Kennedy, if he looks into modern vaccines of old, whatever, and ends up basically saying, hey, man, I will default to the way things have been going. But if he asks questions and lets the sunlight in, and helps people understand, he'll come out looking even cleaner because he'll be the guy doing actual science. That's what's fantastic here. All the doctors signing forms right now, trying to get Kennedy knocked off. Steve, you know how many classes
are these like
they
the
took?
intelligence officials who told us that Hunter Biden's laptop wasn't real?
Yeah. Do you know how many, becoming doctors, how many classes they took on vaccines, immunology? 0. This whole thing is pharma driven. And listen, these doctors, some of it's human nature, you talk about all the time, psychological. I get it. You put in hard work. Becoming a doctor is hard work. On the back end, you want to get paid. All right? Pharma, make sure you get paid. You took no classes. Hey, what's the easiest thing in the world to do? If somebody's scared, if they're sick, give them a pill, give them a shot, give them some medicine. I've been told it works. They're humans like anybody else. But this is the magical power of vaccines. And on the doctor end, it's driven by they get paid. And we know they did. We have the receipts for COVID. And just like you and Daniel have talked about, if we know it happened for COVID, Steve, what do you think's been happening the whole time on the other front?
All right. I've got one final question to ask you about this after we talk about our friends at Constitution Wealth. I've got a question for you. Are you looking to align your investments with your conservative values and take more control over your investment choices? Well, many investors don't even realize that they can influence company policies such as DEI, CRT, and ESG by exercising shareholder proxy voting and by reducing their investments in companies that don't share their conservative values. Constitution Wealth helps clients make informed investment decisions that reflect their principles. And their team of investment professionals are passionate about helping you align your investments with your traditional values. If you're ready to learn more about how your investments can better match your principles, visit constitutionwealth.com/blaze for a free consultation. That's constitutionwealth.com/blaze, constitutionwealth.com/blaze. And Constitution Wealth is a registered investment advisor. Registration does not imply a certain level of skill or training. And before considering their services, you should carefully review Constitution Wealth's disclosures at constitutionwealth.com to understand all material risks, conflicts of interest, and fees. And all investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. This is a paid endorsement. I am not a client of the firm. All right, one final question on this topic with his hearing yesterday, RFK Jr.'s Todd. Do you think he gets to 49? Or gets to 50, I should say, so that J.D. Vance can at least 50, so J.D. Vance breaks the tie?
I think so. And if he doesn't, things are even worse than I've laid out on this front in terms of the need to make the lie the point.
If he doesn't get there, the Trump administration should already have a plan to turn him into a recess appointment. I think he could serve in that capacity for up to, I think it's 100 days by statute, I think, something like that. I'd make him a recess appointment to let him have some power in there while you're filling his position. And then, of course, I would just give him a formal healthcare advisory position within the administration so that he is still front and center from a platform standpoint where he can still influence the debate. That's what I would do if he cannot get there. Do you think any Democrats vote for him, like Fetterman, for example? Do you think Fetterman votes for RFK Jr.?
Well, maybe Fetterman, but he's not I know his pro-choice that's not shocking about him, but I don't even think he's a Democrat. I just think he's washed his hands of all that stuff. I just think he's a very independent force right now. But other than that, no, I don't think so. The pharma money is too big and the cult is too strong.
All right, when we come back, there's one other matter here in this first hour I want to tackle that is explicitly about worldview. And I want to get into it, even though it's not in the news right now, but it is something that I saw posted on X this morning from an unlikely source, actually. And his observation is 100% correct. But I think we need to come in and explain why that's the case. And we'll do that here in a moment. Stay tuned. All right, back here on a stripped-down version of the Steve Deace Show, because we're down a key man here. Aaron McIntyre is at home trying to let a really bad stomach virus run its course. All right. So thanks again to Stephen Smith, John Munoz, and the team at The Blaze for scrambling this morning right after Glenn's show and even during it to make sure that we could get on the air today. So we're not going to have any guests or some of the elements you're accustomed to, but you'll at least get Todd Erzin and I here for a full 2-hour program today, courtesy of our friends also over at Sweetheart Winery. Valentine's Day right around the corner. And let's be honest, folks, meaning guys, finding the perfect gift isn't always easy, but this year we've got something that will make it simple, special, and unforgettable for the both of you. It's Valentine's wine from Sweetheart Winery right there in Loveland, Colorado. That's the birthplace of the tradition of mailing Valentine's Day cards. And the winemakers over at Sweetheart, they put together 2 of their most romantic wines, a rich, bold Alexander Valley, California Cabernet Sauvignon, which is the signature Valentine's wine. And then there's the other one that I tried. And if that's the other one, if that's the B team, then holy moly. Because I had to force myself to stop drinking this Pinot Noir. It was so good. From the Santa Cruz Mountains on the Pacific Coast, one of the very finest in the country, world-class wines, and they're perfected with every order comes with a handwritten love note to boot. These love notes, by the way, are really classy. They look great. And it's because the people that own Sweetheart Winery used to own a wedding business. And so they understand romance and pomp and circumstance, and they get that. The presentation matters. And so they put that handcraftedness into the presentation that you get for them so that you score the points that you want on Valentine's Day. All right, so order now, right now at sweetheartwinery.com/love, sweetheartwinery.com/love. Use the code DACE for 15% off your order, code DACE for 15% off your order at sweetheartwinery.com/love, code DACE for 15% off at sweetheartwinery.com/love. All right, this is not it's a pivotal matter in our culture right now. It is one of the main inflection points, one of the hot zones in our cold Civil War, culture war in America right now. But there's not necessarily one thing that is causing this conversation to happen in the news. We're having it because I saw this show up in my feed today, and I saw Elon Musk, the richest man in the world who happens to control the largest platform for the free dissemination of information in the history of the planet. He 100'd it and liked it. Michael Malice, of course, if you're a Blaze devotee, he's no stranger to you. He's been a guest on Glenn's show many times over the years, kind of an anarcho-capitalist libertarian type. And I've met Michael before, really smart guy when he's not provoking Jason Whitlock to stomp him out. He's a really smart guy. And Michael Malice posted this morning in my feed that I saw, my For You feed, Todd. Quote, anyone who claims a child can make an informed decision about gender is minutes away from claiming a child can make an informed decision about sex. Correct.
Groomer update.
Yes, he's 100% right, and that's what this has been about all along. It's the argument that they're raging at the time is always to set up what the next argument and this really wants to go, and this argument has always been about. And Todd, you remember back when Iowa was at the tip of the spear in the gay marriage battles, and I used to bring people on from the other side on my local show back in those days, and listen to their arguments. And I used to say to them, "Oh, you're really arguing then that gender doesn't exist, because you're essentially removing the distinctions of male and female. You're saying that there is not a natural order of things that prompts and provokes men to be attracted to women and women to be attracted to men for the perpetuation of the species. You're saying that essentially desire trumps biology, or if biology gets in the way of my desire, desire is biology, which would in effect mean that gender doesn't matter. There's no such thing as gender, male and female." And do you remember how they would react on my show, Todd, whenever I'd make that point to them on the air? Do you remember how they'd react?
Just raw honesty, Steve.
Yes. They'd always deny it. In fact, they'd get incensed that I said this. No, that's a slippery slope. They would lose it. They would get incensed when I said this. Well, what is the entire argument we've been having the last 4 years in the culture? This very argument, Todd, this very one. It is what they meant all along. Go ahead.
They were incensed, Steve, because I remember you told, and you've said this publicly before. I can't remember who it was interviewing you, New York Times or somebody like that. but they actually stopped you at some point and said, wait, you actually believe all this stuff. And
Yes.
that's what normally the people on the other side could just get the Republicans to play along. They were too scared. They knew they had to check the cultural boxes, even, Christian leaders about tolerance, yada, yada, yada. And your career 20 years back, you were just like, no, I ain't playing that game. And so I remember even Bob Vanderplatz, who everybody knows, much nicer guy than Steve Deace or myself. But back in the day, he and Reka Basu, former very liberal columnist for the Des Moines Register.
There's a Reka Basu in every urban sector in America at every newspaper. Yes.
Yeah. Even Bob did the same tactic to her. And she said, no, we're not talking about that. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. The lie has been the point all along.
Right. I mean, like our local NBC affiliate during those battles brought me on the air for a one-on-one, and they thought they were going to corner me, and they chose unwisely. They thought wrongly. Okay. And so they wanted to ask me, do I believe that gays should be allowed to openly serve in the military? And I said, I think all able-bodied people that are able to meet the military standard for service and honor the Uniform Code of Military Justice ought to be able to serve their country if they want. Well, what about gays? I said, I think all able-bodied people that are able to meet the standards of service in the military and honor the code of the Uniformed Military Code of Justice ought to be able to serve their country if they want. So they asked me a third time, what about gays? I said, I only know of men and women. Do you know of a third kind of person? Because that's what they were arguing then. They were arguing then, gender's not a thing. That's what they were arguing then. And that's what they're arguing now. What Michael is pointing out is even though it seems like they're arguing gender now, they're not. What they're really arguing is age of consent. It's always, and they, by the way, I'm talking doctrines of demons. All these arguments have all taken place before. These are not new. Not even the tranny stuff, not even the castrating stuff. There's whole sections of the Bible where God says essentially through Moses, if men eunuch themselves for religious expression, they are forbidden in my presence, an abomination. Irredeemable, really, is essentially what God is saying. Don't come back. Don't let them in. Not allowed. And you have to understand what this has been about from the very beginning. It's been about the kids, guys. All of it has been. All of it's been, it's never been about, well, why can't a guy who's same-sex attracted visit his fellow same-sex attracted lover in a hospital room? Those are all lies. It's not about how's my gay marriage impact your gay marriage, or we're just here to read story time to the kid. It's not about any of those things. It's been about all movements of sexual deviancy in all cultures have always been about going after the kids. Why? Because they can't replenish themselves.
Yep.
They can't replenish themselves. This is no way to, they don't have any progeny. This is how they pass it on. They have to recycle themselves by going after other people's kids. We did a lot of talk at the beginning of the year on the show about the differences between Western or Christendom, Western culture and Islamic culture, and how there's just too many irreconcilable views, and clearly the Western culture is the superior one. There are some places, there's not many, but there are some places where they actually have similarities. Would you like to know one of them? This very conversation. See, even your terminology is wrong. Like I had to explain to you guys about Islam, that jihad does not mean holy war. That is actually not what it means. It means inner or my struggle. The Quran means recite. Islam means submission. All Muslims are called to holy war. Again, these are things you probably haven't been taught or properly catechized into, and are just getting, not even baseline accurate Reader's Digest interpretations from corporate media about. The same applies here. Like the term pedophile. The term is being used now to apply to every single time someone seeks to have sex with someone that is beneath an age of consent, depending on the state. A 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old. That's actually not what pedophile means. But we changed that term. That we've made pedophile an all-encompassing term. We did it on purpose, and I'm going to tell you why. You want to know why? Because every time homosexuality has been rampant, widespread, accepted in a culture, and it's happened many times throughout history. In fact, this is one of the few things that the Arab Muslim cultures and the West have in common. Within the elite sectors of both the Ottoman and Greco-Roman empires, homosexuality was rampant. And every time homosexuality was rampant, guess what went along with it? Pederasty. See, the whole thing with Roy Moore years ago and whether he trolled the malls of Alabama, he wasn't being a pedophile, if that's what you think he did. It was actually pederasty. Now, we got rid of the word pederasty, and you don't hear it very often. Why? Because it is part and parcel with mainstreaming homosexuality. There has never been a culture, whether it's an Arab Bedouin culture or a Greco-Roman one, there has never been a culture in the history of humanity that once homosexuality went mainstream, either in the culture itself or a vector of it, and usually it's been the latter. It's extremely rare that in human history that homosexuality went rampant down to the base level of the citizenry. Usually it's just the most debauched sectors of the elites with too much time on their hands, and idle hands are the devil's playthings. But whenever that happens, pederasty comes next. What is pederasty? It's what the Catholic priest did. This is what happened to the Catholic priesthood. This is why well, we're going to admit homosexuals into the priesthood, provided they don't practice homosexuality. But then we're going to dangle there in front of them all these 6th to 10th grade, 11th grade boys and expect them not to act on those desires. Foolishness. And many people were done tremendous damage, and the church's credibility done tremendous damage for this. But we got rid of the term pederasty because no one wants to admit the underside of the belly here when you mainstream homosexuality. Every single time you end up grooming the pubescent children into, meaning those who are still minors, but biologically are of age, you end up mentoring them into the same lascivious lifestyle every single time. So maybe you've heard it said that Nero brought his slave to the Senate to marry him. That would have been a pederast. During the Crusades, the Ottoman generals, the Muslim generals from the Ottoman Empire, when they were away from their wives, they'd bring their 14, 15, 16-year-old boy toys with them, their pederasts, to sexually gratify them when they were months, if not years, away from the home front at war. It's part and parcel. There's never been one without the other. Never. You can see it in the story of Harvey Milk, for example. Every single time. They don't replenish themselves. So they have to recycle themselves through other people's kids. That's why there's always grooming. That's why there's always propagandizing. It's always been about the kids. And now that they have successfully mainstreamed this behavior everywhere and it successfully ejected the term pederast, and now what you're and through everything under pedophile, now guess what they're doing to the term pedophile? It's almost all but gone. Now you're a minor attracted person. This has been the goal all along. Now, I'm not advocating that we should go back to these policies. I don't even think it would be possible given where the culture is at to even get there. But if you're wondering why homosexuality often throughout the history of Western civilization has been considered a criminal act, I'm explaining to you why. It never just stays two consenting adults in the bedroom. It never does. And it was never meant to. It was always meant to be an infectant. It was always meant to be a pollutant. That's the point of it, to undermine God's created order. That's the entire point. And now we're just arguing 3 levels up or down, if you prefer, the highway to hell, 3 levels down, the exact same arguments, just recycled all over again every time we reach a new level, until you hit rock bottom, and that's usually when the sulfur falls. But this is why traditionally this was, don't go look at what don't go Google what the founding fathers thought of homosexuality. Don't do that. You'll end up on every watch list, and you'll violate all of your firewalls at your jobs, and there's going to be a lot more unemployed people. Don't do that. But if you're wondering why these laws existed, and they existed in the United States until Lawrence v. Texas in the late 1990s, this is why. It's what Daniel Horowitz describes as a social contagion. It is meant to get out and not just be. Before we legalized gay marriage, how many people were in prison in America for practicing a monogamous same-sex relationship? I'll answer that for you. 0. Nobody was. So the whole thing was a canard. The entire point of all of this was the kids. Every time. Get to the kids. It's right in there. Go read After the Ball if you can find. It's out of use. This has always been the plan. Todd, do you have any thoughts on that in the last minute here before we head out for the hour?
Yeah, well, that's why I got a side hustle on millstones going on. Yeah, well, Steve, this is why it's so important to keep mercy and justice tethered to one another. The Christian notion right now, the popular Christian notion of that will let chaos reign. There's no tolerance. There's no diversity, as the secular mind wants you to think within Christianity. There are definitions that are just male and female together. That's what brings a family. If you get soft-headed on that and let justice go, and you think, oh, but I'll still have the mercy. No, you just get chaos. That's it.
Correct. Yeah, the same religion that from the father of lies that says you don't require any forgiveness doesn't offer any of its own either. That's the entirety of this is a lie, because it's deception incarnate. That's what it is. And we are now recognizing, how'd we get here? Well, we said yes at step 1, we said yes at step 2, and it makes perfect sense now that we're being asked to say yes at step 3. We'll come back in a moment. It'll be time for Theology Thursday. We're going to finish chapter 6 in Romans this week because there's 2 big ideas Paul's going to communicate that go right to the heart of our issue today. And we're back here with hour 2, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. It's better, Aaron McIntyre. We miss you. The audience does. Just not the same without you. Literally. Not the same without you. We're doing a very stripped down. I wish we could say, hey, we decided to kind of go old school and avant-garde. Steve Deace Show unplugged today. Nope. Aaron is at home struggling with a nasty stomach bug, and so we had to scramble to make sure we could bring you the same level of mediocrity that you've grown accustomed to. And got to thank Stephen Smith, John Munoz, the team back there in Dallas at the Blaze. They did most of the scrambling here, if we're being honest. So they did a great job making sure you're even getting this kind of skim milk version of the Steve Deace Show. I'm here in the Man Cave Command. Todd Erzin is back there in the studio. And you can let us know what you think about what we think, no matter where you are, by emailing the show, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Also, please subscribe to our new YouTube channel, at Deace Show on YouTube. That's at Deace Show on YouTube. And then finally, if you love the podcast, please show us and the rest of the world how much you do love us. By declaring it via a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your preference. Thank you if you have. And then also hit subscribe or on iTunes follow, and that way every time we drop one of these new episodes, it drops right there in your podcast feed every time. And thanks if you've done that too. And thanks to our friends also over at Voice of Judah Israel. They are working hard to be the hands and feet of the gospel as a Messianic Jewish ministry there in the Holy Land, to bring the gospel back to the place God brought it forth here for us. Because the Apostle Paul declares, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone believes. In fact, he says that in the book of Romans that we're studying for Theology Thursday as we speak. Well, today, there's over 6.5 million Jewish people in Israel, over 9 million Israelis who have yet to hear the gospel. So Voice of Judah Israel does community outreach. They meet physical needs through good works and acts of charity, but they don't mistake that they're just mere do-getters either. I mean, they are preaching and teaching the gospel of Yeshua, or Jesus Christ, there as well. If you want to support this effort to bring the good news back home to God's chosen people, who knows? This could be part of what Paul will talk about later in the book of Romans when he talks about a great harvest amongst the Jewish people to call them to their Messiah before he returns. This could even be a part of that. We don't even know. So why not be a part of it? You can go to vojisrael.org/Steve and support their mission of sharing hope and the gospel in Israel. Again, VOJ for Voice of Judah, vojisrael.org/Steve. That's vojisrael.org/Steve. All right, we are back now with some Theology Thursday. Just you and I are going to hit this today, Todd. And I want us to I want us to do the entire rest of chapter 6 of Romans. So verses 15 through 23. And I want us to do it, Todd, if you don't mind, as one particular portion of Scripture, because I think it's communicating to, not just to, but primarily to meta-narratives and ideas that I think both believers and unbelievers have to grasp. I mean, if you're not a believer, but you're sharing this culture with a lot of believers, you're sharing this audience with a lot of believers, I think it's important for you to know where we're coming from. You know, that whole three-dimensional thinking thing. Know why you believe what you believe, number one. Know why others believe what they believe, number two. And know why others believe what they believe about what you believe is number three. That applies both ways too. I mean, you kind of want to know where we're coming from, even if you don't agree, even if you're not going where we're going. And even if you think where we're going is nuts or crazy, we're sharing a country together. If you're tuned into this show, we're likely sharing a political coalition together, right? So you kind of want to know, oh, well, that explains why those Christians react this way maybe in these situations, or they go ahead and they do this that way, or they don't do something the other way. The two things we'll talk about in this portion of Scripture, in Paul's letter to the church in Rome, I think are both cautionary tales, but also necessary guidebooks for believer and unbeliever alike to understand what it means if you're a believer to live for Christ, and if you're an unbeliever, why your believing friends and family might agree with you on a lot of issues, but they don't go maybe to the places on those issues that you do, or they go further than maybe you're willing to go even. So let's start in verse 15. And we're going to take this to the end of chapter 6. What then, Paul says, are we to sin or disobey God because we are not under law but under grace? Meaning, can I just live any way I want? By no means. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves? By the way, the word slave there in Greek means slave. That's what it means. It means slave. Sometimes some of your versions will translate it to bondservant. And then you look up, what is a bondservant? Slave. That's what it means. You are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, meaning God's word, which leads to righteousness. But thanks be to God that you who were once slaves of sin have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed, and having been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. I am speaking in human terms, because of your natural limitations. For just as you once presented your members as slaves to impurity and to lawlessness leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves to righteousness leading to sanctification. For when you were slaves of sin, you were free in regard to righteousness. But what fruit were you getting at that time from the things of which you are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. But now that you have been set free from sin and have become slaves of God, the fruit you get leads to sanctification, and its end, eternal life. For the wages of sin is death. But the free gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. And if you go back to Romans 3, when we first heard Paul say, and he's quoting from the Old Testament when he says this, for the wages of sin is death, as we reiterated that at that time, let's do so again here, Todd. A wage is something you earn. A wage is something you earn. Okay? You worked for that. You've received your reward in full. God did not punish you directly because you have an STD that has rendered you infertile after practicing so many acts of sexual lasciviousness outside of marriage. All right? Now, God can do that. We've seen him send those kinds of plagues, those kinds of supernatural acts. But most of the time, you've received, or another way of saying wage is a due penalty. What's a due penalty? What's due? What you owe. What you owe is what is due. What you owe is what is due. So it wasn't like God singled you out. All right, here's this one particular slut, and I'm going to pick on him or her. No. You earned it, man. You worked. You worked for that infection. You put in the work, literally, in order to get it. A wage. You earned it. Do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. We always reap what we sow. That's what due penalty means in Romans 1. That's what wages of sin is death means here and in Romans 3. You have earned it. This is where you sowed your seed. So this is the crop. This is the harvest now that you will produce. Or as the pagans put it, what goes around comes around. All right? But there are two major ideas here that I think need to get communicated, Todd, that go right to the spirit of our particular age. Number one, let's talk about the word slave. Maybe if you've listened to the show for a long time, you've heard me cite Dr. James Dobson with, I think, one of the most astute observations I've ever heard in my career. That when you boil it all down, there's really only two worldviews. There's a lot of isms within those worldviews. All right. So Todd and I each belong to the worldview that says God is. Now he has an ism within that is Catholicism. I have an ism within that is evangelicalism. Times we agree, at times we're at odds. We are differing factions or differing isms within the same worldview. All right. But there's really only two worldviews. God is, or he isn't. That's really it. That's all there really is, and there isn't anymore. Those are really the only two worldviews when you boil it all down. If we did a taxonomy of worldviews, so we started way up here. I always forget what's on the first line. Is it kingdom or phylum? Do you even remember? Whatever's on the first line. All right. There's only two options. Now, underneath them, as we continue to break down the taxonomy of these worldviews, man, they're going to go off into all kinds of vectors and sectors, and you're going to look like that gif where that guy's got his hands on his temples, and there's formulas going off around his head, okay? Because human nature is complicated. But if we retconned it, all right, and reverse engineered it and went from the bottom to the top, it would start way out here, but then as we went to the top, it would continue to narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow, and we're right here, and there's really only two lines. God is or he isn't. God is or he isn't. That's it. Those are the only two. And since they're the only two options, you will belong to one of them. You may believe there's a third option. There's a third way. A middle way. You're a moral free agent. I mean, you're free to believe whatever you want, but just because you're free to believe whatever you want doesn't mean whatever you believe is actually true. That's not true. What Paul is saying here and what God's word is saying here, those are your only two options. And when we say belong, like a slave, you will be chained, tethered to one of these two worldviews. So if the only option is to be chained to that which leads to death, or to be chained to that which leads to life, choose to be chained to that which leads to life. That's what he is saying. Those are your only two options. There aren't any other options. There's no secular. How many times have I said this recently? There's no secular. There's no neutral ground. Someone will always rule. Something will always be worshipped. You're not God, and neither am I. So there's never a moment that we are completely autonomous. There's never a moment that our agency is our own alone. Such a moment never exists. And when we act as if it does, then we have chosen to be slaves to the worldview that says God isn't, and essentially made ourselves or something else to be God, and we will chase after that. I can take this back. I can take this notion, Todd, to literally any issue, any argument we're having in our culture today. I can tie this portion of Scripture to it. So, for example, Last hour, we talked about RFK Jr.'s hearing, which reminds me now, I think I forgot to mention the one area I disagreed with him on. If we have time at the end of the show, I'll bring it up because I think it's worthy of discussion on our show. Meaning, just to clarify, there are several areas I disagree with RFK Jr. on. I meant from his testimony yesterday, there's one thing I disagreed with. But this idea, the old liberal order coming out of the counterculture of the 60s, we want to be free unto ourselves, not accountable to a God, a moral standard, any form of transcendence. And as long as people are consenting as highly evolved mammal adults to these activities, then it's nobody's business what they do. And that sounded great for a while. And then we had COVID and all the iconoclastic rock stars. Remember Rage Against the Machine? Doing songs like Bulls on Parade and Wake Up.
Well, we kind of need you guys to show us your Vax Pass before you can come to our next concert and get down in the mosh pit and pretend to be the resistance here. That's what we kind of need.
Show your Vax Pass to pay $300 a ticket for Rage Against the Machine, okay? Elizabeth Warren, nothing says power to the people. Down with the power structures, quite like, why won't you take everything corporations with complete liability shields demand we inject? She's a slave. We're all slaves. In the meta sense, we're all slaves. We're not God. We're humans. We might be the highest beings in the created order, but we're not the creator. And he's part of an order above and beyond us and apart from us, holy even, set apart. So you will belong to one of these classifications. Or you'll be a slave. They didn't have taxonomy yet in Paul's day, so he just used the vernacular that was common in the day. Slavery, by the way, did not have many of the human chattel hang-ups in the ancient world that we had. There was human chattel slavery, but it was kind of just expected as a sunk cost of what happens when you get conquered, okay? It was also, by the way, the only thing, it was kind of a proto version of a working class. You had the learned, you had the elite, you had the destitute. There was only 3 classes throughout much of the ancient world. So the closest thing to a working class would be to sell yourself into a form of slavery. You weren't necessarily human chattel, but you offered your body up to be used in the service of people wealthier than you. When we get to Romans 12, Paul's going to use language that I use in my own daily prayers. Offer yourselves up as a living sacrifice. That's what this is alluding to, back to here. We will be slaves to something. We will be, if you don't like the word slave in our modern parlance, I understand it's loaded. There's lots of other terms we could use that would all mean the same thing. You will belong to something. You will be beholden to something. You will devote yourself to one of these two things. If those terms pass through the filter of our modern nomenclature and vernacular better, fine. In the context of this scripture, Todd, they all mean the same thing. So you're on one of these two teams ultimately. Now, within those two teams, just like in a sports league, there's conferences and divisions and all-star teams, right? Taxi squads and practice squads and free agents. All these entities are all in the same league. They're not maybe all on the same team. And at times, these teams can't stand one another and they're trying to rip out each other's throats. But they're all part of the same league. There's only 2 leagues. God is or he isn't. And then the debate comes from that point on. The only debate is where your standing is in those 2 leagues. But those are your only 2 options. There is no middle ground. There is no neutrality. There is not some agnostic libertarian center where we can, going back to the Michael Malice comment that we talked about last hour, where we can observe that the whole intent here is to lower the age of consent sexually, but we're going to go ahead and just give up all the other sexual depravity that got us to this point without recognizing, oh, that's how we got to this point. God is or he isn't. Todd, your thoughts?
Well, this begs the question, then if you're slaves either way, why is it so much easier for not only people outside of the church, but even people inside of the church to pretend like they or actively say they prefer one slavery over the other? Well, because as the scripture points out that you just read, Steve, these aren't the same kinds of slavery. One of them is did God really say slavery?
Mm-hmm.
It is designed by definition to make you comfortable. This is why I hammer this on the show on almost every issue. I do it online, on X, and a lot of people, even Christians, don't like it. Well, take it up with the Bible then, because we are, as a Christian people, way too comfortable, which is why our version of slavery, even within the church, is not often preferred, and people prefer the decadent one. Scott Hahn, in going passage by passage, but his summary to basically talk about everything you said, talk about this, the whole passage you read, focuses on slavery and the definition, just like you, Steve, because you guys agree. Paul uses the slavery metaphor to say that the Christian life is difficult. Yielding oneself to the will of another is a formidable task, to say the least. It means constantly overcoming the selfishness of the flesh. There is no point in sugarcoating the reality. Israel, having escaped Egyptian slavery, quickly discovered that serving the Lord was even more demanding on the will than serving Pharaoh. So much so that some yearn for the old days of Egypt. This is a fact we should take to heart in view of Paul's Exodus typology in Romans 6. Through baptism, we too have been freed from serving a heavy-handed master. Last time, 2 weeks ago, we had to skip last week. That's what I talked about. Baptism, we've been returned to the garden. But remember, the wages of sin is death, something you earned. The gift is not something you've earned or ever earned, which means you can abuse it. You're not on autopilot. If you want to, you can abuse that gift, which is where his butt comes in. But our freedom is not for a life of ease. We too must tread a path to the promised land that takes us through a wilderness of trials and temptations and requires a valiant conquest of all the obstacles of sin that stand in the way.
If I could just summarize what you just said, essentially the choice that every person within the sound of my voice has, and every person within the sound of any voice ever uttered throughout all of human history and will throughout whatever the future of humanity is. This is the ultimate choice. You can choose to suffer and endure for a little while this side of eternity in order to experience paradise for all of eternity on the other side. Or you can take the other path of least resistance and indulge all of your proclivities and desires and self-centeredness in order to then endure suffering for all of eternity on the other side. That's essentially the choice that Scott Hahn just articulated, is what you just said.
Yeah, but in terms of suffering, and God, our cup runneth over here in the West. And Steve, how you've spent your whole career trying to preserve that cup as full as possible by getting rid of the lies. But no matter how comfortable we get, we must, it's not an option as Christians, we must suffer. It's a way, and that's just honest.
Even if that suffering is merely just I deny the things that I know are bad that I still want, which we'll talk a lot about in the next chapter of this book next week, okay? Even if that suffering just for each of us is the baseline suffering of I must reject things that I know are bad for me, that I really want, that God says are bad, because I'm going to trust that God's righteousness is better and he'll reward that obedience. Even if that's just, but that's the baseline suffering all of us have to go through if you're a believer.
And it's the way we never fall for. Did God really say? If we're suffering, we know we're on the road. It's God, the Lord himself. And if he didn't promise to us, then we maybe, is my theology wrong? He said, they did this to me. What do you think they're going to do for you? He gave us that gift. Be honest with ourselves, as honest with yourself as he was with you, because that's how you know you're on the road. How many times do I say the Christian on the cul-de-sac, Steve?
Pardon me. Go ahead.
The Christian on the cul-de-sac looks exactly in every way, shape, and form just like the pagan living next door, because they're both rooted. They're both rooted in finding comfort at every turn.
We as believers should feel tension with the world. If you're an unbeliever listening to this, you should feel tension with believers around you. Doesn't mean that you guys can't be friends, can't get along, but there's going to be areas where there's got to be some tension because, again, you belong to one of these two teams, or as Augustine would put it, you're in the city of man or the city of God. Those are the two places of residence that we all live until Christ returns.
Let's put some meat on this bone, Steve. How in the heck do you think that transgenderism, the butchery of transgenderism, did it just happen in California? Matt Walsh had to root it out in Nashville, Tennessee, conservative Hollywood. It happened because we got comfortable. Trust the expert comfortable. They basically have good intentions comfortable. Life is hard sometimes comfortable. And
I don't want the blowback for speaking out against that, which I know is wrong, comfortable. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. That's putting meat on the bone of this thing. We just had reasons not to get involved, not to say anything, not to do anything. It happened in Catholic hospitals and Christian hospitals because we lied to ourselves and we wanted comfort above all else.
And if you consistently make that choice enough, despite what you are professing with your mouth, you're essentially saying, I am on the God isn't team. Because you know a tree by its fruit, ultimately.
Faith without works is dead.
Correct. That brings me to the second point we should address here. And I want to drop a term, antinomianism. That's a fancy stained glass window term for now that I'm saved, I can live any way I want and just abuse it, and God has nothing to say to me. I'll give you an example of antinomianism. It's the pagan priestess witch lecturing Donald Trump at the National Cathedral 2 weeks ago. That's an example of antinomianism. What happens is God is love becomes love is God. My definition of love, by what I think is right, by what seems right to me. And that's, again, where you're living for yourself. And you're not living for your master. You're living, or your new master. You're living for the old one, sin. That's a way of living for yourself. You chose the other team. We can't just live any way we want. What should change is that once we become believers, our desires for how we want to live should change from the inside out. Doesn't mean there's not going to be tension from the outside in. And Paul's going to talk a lot about that when we get into chapter 7 starting next week. But the tension is a sign that you are on the right team, that the tension is there. If the tension is not there, yikes. And that tension's going to be there to the day you're called home, or you're no longer of sound mind and body. But that's the other thing, this idea that, well, there's nothing demanded of us. Jesus died for us. And so therefore, God is love. And to call anything out, to confront any immorality is unloving. And therefore, we can, ergo, live any way that we want. No, we can't. Because our life is not our own. We were bought at a high price, redeemed. Like slaves. Slaves are bought and sold or redeemed by their master, as were we, if our master is Christ. Now, if we want to consistently act as if that's not the case, and there will be difficulty and tensions, we're going to learn a lot as believers over the years. What Thomas Wayne means in Batman Begins when he keeps asking his son, why do we fall down so we can get back up? You're going to fall down, you're going to get back up a lot. But if you start falling down and staying down, or if you don't feel that tension, maybe what you think you professed and confessed to never really happened. But that tension is going to exist forever. In this mortal body, because our flesh does not want to conform to this, as you're going to see Paul talk about next chapter. It doesn't want to live in the spirit. It doesn't. It's fallen. So you're going to fight your own nature, your own desires. Now, you're not going to fight it alone. You're going to have God's Spirit, the hope of glory, Christ in you, waging that battle for you, resting in that battle. But you have to want to wage it. You have to desire ultimately, what's the greatest commandment? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. What does that look like? Exactly what we're talking about here. Todd, I'll give you the last word on this.
Well, antinomianism means no rule, no law. Well, you just got done reading about the choice. You are slaves of the one you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness. Righteousness, I've defined many times biblically, conformity to a standard or norm. That standard or norm is now the fulfillment of the law. It is the life and teaching of Jesus Christ himself. That's it. So we know more than ever before, actually, about why antinomianism is such nonsense, because we have the fulfillment of the good, the true, and the beautiful in a person. It's not an application. It's a real flesh and blood lived life that ended up on a cross. Suffering should be ever present, and laying down and just taking it, as Steve rightly pointed out, that's actually not suffering. That's giving up. Suffering is fighting.
That's a great, we could go on and on. I mean, centuries of work within the faith have been written about the 2 points that you and I are discussing right now. And we could go on and on about them for now, but because I also know they're going to come back up later in this exact same letter, I love where you finished your comments there. So let's close the book on this discussion for Theology Thursday this week right there. Okay, because I do think it's important to get to on the show today the one thing RFK Jr. said yesterday that I disagree with, because it touches on all the worldview stuff on our show that we talk about all the time. So we'll get there, and we'll do that here when we come back. Stay tuned. All right, back here on the Steve Deace Show. Hey, if you're looking to get out and do something for a date night this weekend and you want maybe a good movie with a redemptive narrative, check out the latest from our friends over at Angel Studios. It's called Brave the Dark. It's the true story of Nate Williams, who witnessed just an unspeakable horror as a child. And then, of course, when you're exposed to that level of darkness, it has a tendency to kind of stick to you. And you see that play out over the course of the rest of his growing up. And it looks like he's on a path to nowhere or an orange jumpsuit before his teacher, a man of faith, gets involved and tries to make a difference in his life. Very well acted. It's out in theaters now. Check it out and get tickets from our friends at Angel Studios by going to angel.com/Steve. That's angel.com/Steve. Name of the movie, Brave the Dark. And you can get your tickets today at angel.com/Steve. Todd, there's actually one more thing I think on antinomianism that I want to say before we get to the part of RFK Jr.'s testimony yesterday that I disagreed with before we get out of here. When you see Hollywood or you see major celebrities like a Taylor Swift, for example, say, I'm a Christian, but then go promote abortion and things, the word of God is very clear. Even unbelievers understand the word of God opposes, okay? When you see politicians do this, okay? Those are examples of antinomianism, all right? And that's a heresy. And if you're a heretic, you're not a believer. You're on the other team. You're on there's only 2 teams. You're not on team God is, because you've determined that I get to reinvent what the word of God says, just like that's a pagan priestess in the pulpit at the National Cathedral. I get to reinvent what God's word is and what it says. And maybe I put commas where God put periods. And maybe I came up with some things that he hasn't come up with yet. You know, we workshop this thing and brainstorm this thing, and we kind of think God's maybe a little outdated here, so we kind of got our own take on things. That's all antinomianism. All right, the idea that I am now, I remain completely free while accepting the free gift of God's grace that he suffered beyond speakable torture in order to grant me. No, you're not. You're an ingrate, actually. And this is where we get into the entire argument we've had many, many times throughout the book of Romans, all right, which is Todd's view, did you lose your salvation? My view, you never had it in the first place. Regardless of where you come down on that, the end result is the same, okay? You have taken what God has offered you and treated it as an ingrate would and rejected it. Thus, he has rejected you, all right? So those are real world examples we see in our own lives of antinomianism. Let's get to the one thing that RFK Jr. said in his testimony yesterday before we get out of here, Todd, that I didn't agree with. And he made the statement yesterday in his testimony that all these economic issues and all these culture war issues that we are fighting over they're not a threat to end us the way that the public health crisis can literally end us as a civilization. Now, let me acknowledge that when you are in a demographic winner, when you have the worst birth rates you've had since you started keeping the statistic in the mid-19th century, when you have the worst obesity rates in all of human history, when you start getting into the math, we've talked on the abortion issue, sometimes it's just plain old math. We don't have enough people. We probably killed a kid who was going to come up with cold fusion or some clean energy source. We killed him before he or she was born. Maybe the next, Madame Curie, maybe the next Albert Einstein. We took a vacuum and put it inside their mom's birth canal and sucked them out, like her out limb by limb before they could be born and bless the rest of us with the gifts given to them by their creator. The same applies here as well. I mean, if we're just at a point we don't have enough men who can physically perform the duties of what it means to defend the country, right? So he's right in that our public health issues threaten the future of the country. We don't know what all the obesity and inflammation we carry, how that may be impacting fertility rates, for example. Because we always look at the low birth rate as just a conscious moral decision coming out of the sexual revolution, where I now it's not just that sex is an expression of desire, it's singularly desire. It's only there to satisfy desires, has no other purpose beyond that. And then how many people have just, what they've done with their own immune systems and things of that nature, with the way we eat and behave today. So there are aspects of this where what he is saying is correct. But Todd, I would make the case that what he is fighting is a culture war issue. A belief system that starts with, I'll use myself as an example. There were two things that propelled me to lose the first 100 pounds I had to lose. In the natural realm, it was finding out that Amy was going to have a son. And you start thinking to yourself, well, when I'm 10 or 11 years old and they need a forklift in the jaws of life to get me around the house here, that kid's going to run roughshod over us. I'm going to raise a little, piece of turd because I won't be healthy enough to set an example and hold him accountable and discipline him. The other aspect of that, just straight up the Holy Spirit. I mean, I'm a new convert to Christianity at this time as well. I'm starting to really speak out about my faith. And I walk in and I'm 360 pounds. I'm 380 pounds. So I'm not even a good steward of my own temple, let alone preaching to other people what to do with theirs. They're the same impulses that cause us to indulge lasciviously with comfort and sex are the same impulses that and worldviews that do the same when it comes to food. The same worldview, going back to what I mentioned last hour about pederasty, the same worldview that says, well, you can be a homosexual but be a priest if you just don't act on it. And then, oh man, we handed all this kindling in the form of all these vulnerable 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old boys. I can't believe we're just lining up tragedies and paying out of pocket for them. It's the same worldview that says, well, you should be entitled to sue your Lyft driver because he wouldn't put you in his car because he thought you'd break it because you're 600 pounds. In both cases, we're starting with the premise of human beings as basically good. And then if something wrong happens or they act out immorally, we either redefine the morality in the case of homosexuality, or we say you're a victim in the case of obesity. But it's the same impulse. There's no accountability. There's no higher standard. A worldview that says my life is not my own. I was bought at a high price. I am fearfully and wonderfully made in the likeness and image of God also implies responsibility with that body. And I would argue to RFK Jr., and this is again where he's one of the last of the dying old school liberals. That kind of language indicates he believes there's some kind of morally neutral place. No, there's not. I am putting aside the areas where I disagree with Bobby on, specifically because I view this and see this as a culture war issue, as fundamental to the survival of our culture. To the point that I'm putting it in the same camp with what has been the primary issue I've spoken up and out and written about more than any other in my career, and that's the life issue. So no, I don't think this is a public health issue. I think it's a culture war issue manifesting itself in the public health domain. Todd, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the opposite is true of what Bobby is saying on this front, because we've confused healthcare in a lot of different ways. In the ways that he is talking about, and I fundamentally believe in, and I did before COVID even came along. We've talked about that show at length, but also just Western healthcare in general. Living longer, a better quality of life is like everything else in this world, Steve, you've talked about. Is there anything that we cannot make into an idol, Steve?
No, nothing.
No. And we have made that to an idol, into an idol to the extent that, like I just said before, because it's made us so comfortable, you can't tell the Christian living on the cul-de-sac different from the other person, because they're just ultimately going after the same level of comfort. That's their default God at the end of the day. And one thing throughout all of human civilization that being unsettled in any number of ways, is the Hun just over the hill going to take us over? Is grandpa, die at 40 instead of 80? When there's that level of unsettlement, you take God more seriously.
Mm.
This is the whole joke about there's no atheists in foxholes.
Mm-hmm.
Our health got, I want it. Listen, both my parents, I'm 52. Both my parents are dead. I lost my mom right before I got married. She's been gone for 24 years. One of the blessings in losing both my parents earlier than I wanted to is absolutely contemplating the things of God more deeply than if you're on automatic pilot. Mm-hmm. And honestly, one thing, if we're honest with ourselves, having a life expectancy living to 80 has caused us to think about God and apply him to life much less, which makes us wrong about everything, health or otherwise, which is why Bobby's instincts on this are, I think he meant well, but he's wrong. The opposite is actually true. The fact that we're so wrong about health means we've been so wrong about God and the culture for even longer.
I mean, I would, to use your term from last hour, want to talk about connective tissue. The same worldview that says that's not a person, despite the heartbeat you hear, despite the unique DNA it possesses, that's not a person. It's an unviable tissue mass, or it's a child that's unwanted, or it's a child that might be born with a malady, or it's a child that might be born into a suffering situation. And so therefore it's not a child, it's a choice, and we should relieve its suffering and not make its parent, or particularly the mom, made to suffer either, as if it's not fearfully and wonderfully made. It's an automaton. It's a variable in an equation. It's the same exact thing that says we are just going to mass inject and mass blanket people as algorithms and constructs with untested technologies and treat you all the same, and you don't have a patient file anymore. We just have CDC and FDA guidelines that your doctor doesn't treat you anymore, just looks up the code and gives you as if you're a 62-year-old rancher in Missoula and a 27-year-old black man in Queens and a 34-year-old Hispanic man in El Paso. Okay, you're just an algorithm. It's the same worldview. It's the same one. Now, I understand why an old school liberal like Bobby, in order to maintain some of his previous positions, has to concoct some form of a secular realm or just purely scientific arena or place where we are uniquely tempted to sell out for money, because otherwise you end up having to question the rest of your own worldview, and we're sinners. None of us like going around, including the two of us, none of us really like going out and questioning our own worldview and our own motivations. That's why we often need accountability from others to do it, right? Okay, but ultimately, he is arguing every bit the culture war issue as all of the other culture war issues, Todd, that we talk about on our show every single episode.
Yeah, just take the COVID issue. I've never met the man in person. I've known about what he stood for on this front a lot longer in detail than you have, but you've spent time with the man. You enjoyed, you felt like a real person. Do you think if you asked Bobby Kennedy point blank, just take COVID, do you think collectively as a culture we would have gotten COVID this wrong if we were more healthy as a people under God?
No, he would say absolutely not.
Yeah, I think he would say that.
Yep.
Which I just don't think. I know what he was trying to do, and he's helping a people who understand that they think vaccines and medicine in general are modern day magic. He's trying to disabuse them of that. I get it. You try to do that all the time. I do. But ultimately, they think that because they've denigrated God for so long.
Amen. All right, 2-minute warning. You have any final thoughts on the show today other than Aaron, get well? The good thing about those stomach bugs is they often just wreak havoc for about 24 hours and then they're gone. But that 24 hours can really suck, man. That's for sure.
Well, I think radical honesty is the way forward, not just today, but always, starting with God and proceeding forward. We hardly, we're going to be talking about it in the coming days, but in terms of the testimony you see from RFK, you're seeing it, Kash Patel, Tulsi, America demands that we stop telling the lies we've been telling ourselves, starting with, I have to be quiet just to be comfortable.
Think Tulsi Gabbard gets confirmed?
Well, I don't know all the details about the so-called secret vote and all that stuff. I haven't had the chance yet, but again, I'm erring on the side of they keep stepping at every turn. No one's taking their foot off the gas. They're just stepping on it harder. Until I see somebody take their foot off the gas, I'm going to err on the side of yes.
I'll reiterate what I said earlier. If they don't approve Bobby, Trump should give him a recess appointment to that position. It would at least give him a couple of months to run that department and get a look-see under the hood and make at least a few decisions. And then also after that recess appointment, give him some kind of advisor role in the White House that doesn't require a confirmation, but also would give him a very visible platform that on these kinds of issues, the White House can keep sending him out there to talk to the media about them, to also keep framing the debate. I'm hoping that that's their plan B if they can't get to 50 so JD can break the tie. Todd, great job, man. Thanks for altering your approach to today's show as well to make all this happen at the last minute. So just, folks, how valuable is Aaron? It literally took 4 full-time employees between us and Dallas to completely alter our schedules to take his place. That's how valuable he is. So hopefully he gets better soon, and he's back tomorrow when we want to roll it out with the Deace group. Thanks to all of you guys for being extremely patient with us as well for this kind of stripped-down version. And hopefully it was every bit as mediocre and moderately enjoyable as what you are accustomed to. Back at it again tomorrow, noon to 2 Eastern, right after Glenn Beck, right here on Blaze TV. Until then, Romans 8:28.